Welcome to the Franchise Masters podcast, where aspiring entrepreneurs learn what it takes to find, buy, and build successful franchise businesses. My name is Drew Carpenito, and I'm your host as we dive into these fascinating behind-the-scenes stories of people who have used surprising franchises to create massive success. I'm glad you're here. Let's dig in. Welcome to the Franchise Masters podcast. I am excited because my friend and neighbor, Alan Wilson, is here to talk about his journey in getting into franchising and owning and operating a couple Sky Zone franchises. So before we get into Alan's story, a quick little tidbit is, we got to know each other pretty well playing golf for a few days in our member guest. And how much did we beat you guys by? Was it a half point to win the flight? You and your brother?
Well, Drew, I can't remember exactly what the number was, but it seemed insignificant, almost as if it was nothing. But the best part about that is if we weren't going to win, we definitely didn't want you guys to win.
Yeah, no, we had a good old time. That was fun. We played with his brother Bruce. We had a good old time. So, but yeah, no, Alan, thanks for hopping on here, man, and coming
Appreciate
on.
You guys. Appreciate you giving me the time. I think all of this is very interesting. I mean, to me, the hardest part for some people to get out of the working world, out of the corporate world, or working for themselves is that final leap, jump into something that they want to do. And sometimes the challenge is just it's either financial, mental, or emotional.
Yeah, well said. And you had an interesting story because like we were talking about, you got into the trampoline park space. I call it the trampoline park. It's kind of, I know it's evolved since then, but it was early days, right? It was. You said 2011.
It wasn't the old West, but there was definitely some skyscrapers. But the biggest growth in this space was around that 2011, 12, and 13. Really saw a lot of franchises being sold, opened, and realistically seeing a lot of landlords understand that this is a good concept, can drive traffic to areas, and the numbers for the businesses were pretty solid.
Yeah. I'm sure that was interesting, kind of going through that. It's a big investment for, an emerging space that hasn't been around for 30 years kind of thing. But what were you doing before you got into Sky Zone?
I worked in technology for 22 plus years.
Really? Like the corporate side of things?
Yeah, I worked with banks. I worked with internet companies. I worked with consulting companies. I had a nice little career, and but always back in your mind, you're like, well, is this it? I mean, I'm not a math genius, but I can add, subtract, and multiply. And staying, working for the next 25, 30 years, I'd have retired just fine. But something said at about 44 that, if I'm going to do anything, now's the time. And I think people need to really look at the segments of their life. And, if you face challenges, how do you come back from them? Well, my thought was, well, if I'm 40 and something bad happens, I still have an opportunity to work for 14 more years, and hopefully money turning every 7 to 8 to 9 years based on market return. I can still retire pretty well, but felt like that was the time to push the chips in.
Was there something that happened in your life that kind of got you thinking down that path, or was just something that was always in the back of your mind? And
I would say the nature of technology is very simple, right? It's project work. You got to do something. And at some point, it just got to be, the work was different, but the process was the same. So we were going to be a few days later, a few weeks later, we're going to explain that to a person. They're going to say, okay. And then we're going to move on. We're going to implement, and everything was great. And we would just continue to cycle. And I was like to myself, you know what? It's fun, but I'd rather make my own money. And I remember sitting in my cube and thinking about this, looking at various business plans, looking at properties online, and making plans on the weekends and in the evenings to go visit them, talk to landlords and that. And that process got me more and more excited because, you're getting some type of feedback, right? You're in a space where there's not a ton of trampoline parks, and you have to explain to the landlords, building owners, you pick the vernacular, that this is a business that they should be interested in, and they've never heard of it. I mean, without the internet, without YouTube, it was almost impossible to explain what an indoor trampoline park was, let alone having them fully understand what that meant to their building. To this day, the building we have in Greenville, the owner of the building was like, don't put. Probably in the 80s, you had trampoline parks, but you dug the floor out and then you put the trampoline flat. So he kept thinking I was gonna dig out his floor in the building. I'm like, no, it's gonna go right on top of it. I'm like, here's some videos, here's that. And he's like, he just don't dig out my floor. I'm like, not gonna do that. But he came in when we opened and he couldn't believe the fit finish of what the product was. It was really impressive. He's like, he got it. And then, we made I don't want to say a big claim, but we said we're going to bring 100,000 people to the shopping center the first year. We crushed that.
Really?
Crushed it. But that was, again, back in the day when, Charlotte, for example, probably has 6 parks now?
Yeah.
Back in the day, it had 2. Major cities all have lots of different competitors in the space. So it's a pretty interesting space. But you're right. Back in the day, there wasn't very many. It was a big investment, and trying to convince people to do it is very difficult. I think brand awareness. So let's pick haircutting. Gray Click, Sport Clips. All those are well-known brands. Landlords need to know what it means to have one in there. And it's very easy. It's a small space. It's a small investment. But when you're giving up 20, 30, 40,000 square feet, these guys landlords are much different. They want to deal with national credit tenants that they can easily understand what that business model looks like. And so it was really interesting to try to grind through that as I wouldn't say a seasoned operator, but somebody who felt very strongly they could take care of business.
So were you taking over like old Kmart's, like big box kind of?
It was big boxes. There was a first building I looked at. There was it was in Matthews, North Carolina. It was right next to a Target. The building had been vacant for about 6 years. Huh. So I talked to the manager, the property manager. He's like, hey, sent him a kind of a packet of what I was thinking. And he's like, oh, I could he said, they gave me the number. I'm like, you're crazy. That's a lot of money. He goes, this thing's been vacant for 7 years. He goes, we don't care. This is how much it costs. And I'm like, okay, well, I thought it was too much money. Now looking back, I should obviously sign that deal. And that was the first time I realized that commercial real estate, the laws of capitalism don't apply. The landlords don't care.
Really? What do you mean by that?
Well, for a landlord, especially big REITs or people that own multiple buildings, for them to be vacant, they want the right tenant. Because a bad tenant, for a lot of people, you don't get your building back right away. Your leases have various clauses in it and rights to cure. And so landlords are really protective of their buildings because they do a bad lease, they could tie up that property for a year before they get it back.
Right.
So it's one of those things where, and then the building was vacant. And I'm like, dude, it's been vacant for 5 years. He's like, we don't care. We just don't care. They take that as a loss against other buildings. So they'll sit on, a lot of the guys will sit on, like, so for example, right there on 74 was another building I looked at. It had been vacant for, I don't know, that was vacant very long. They're like, we're not going to do a deal unless we feel good about it. I'm like, well, I have money. You need money. Seems like a match made in heaven. It doesn't work that way. Even the building I have in South Carolina, 6 months of negotiating. And we agreed to the terms immediately. And they sat, thought about it. Is this the right? I mean, I can't imagine. So the broker that I had, Greenville being a very small town, the broker knew who the gentleman was, who was the president of the company, and he's like, well, don't make me send kids down there to tell them we want to jump on trampolines. But they finally agreed. I was really surprised. But that's for a lot of these guys, huge spaces. But now, I mean, you jump forward 10 years, landlords all know what the business is. They know it's good. They know that the right operators can bring in a lot of traffic to retail spots. And that's what we're seeing today is a big change in retail is entertainment spaces. I mean, most people are shopping not brick and mortar, but online. So you're looking at your existing spaces, as more entertainment, eating entertainment, looking at, outside of our neighborhood, Waverly, it's predominantly restaurants. It's entertainment.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you were kind of at the forefront when these landlords were still trying to get their head around this idea, and there was still that shift of online shopping becoming the norm. It wasn't probably back then as much, but everything was headed that way. And
everything was, when the big boxes were coming out, they're realizing that they had some challenges, space wise, and these buildings were coming vacant. The only people that really take space now that are our sizes are going to be Gold's Gyms, Planet Fitnesses, and some type of indoor recreation.
Huh.
And it's really interesting to see the difference. But back in the day, from a franchise perspective, for me, I really felt like after meeting everyone, and that's one of the things I think you guys would probably want to think about from the podcast perspective is if you're into franchising, the good news is for the most part, these people are bringing expertise that you may not have. And talking with the folks from Sky Zone, it was amazing. I mean, they really did have the sense that they were the leaders. They knew what they were doing. They started the product. They understood the concept and how to run it. I'm not going to say every franchisor is like that, but that's something that can help people if they're like on the fence, like, should I get into franchising or not? Well, there's a level that you're buying their product and they're an expert and they can help you. And that's the part that I think is that people don't, that you're not in it alone. Like some of the parts you are, but other parts you're very much with them and they're helping you.
What have been some of the areas with your Sky Zone business that you have felt like you've gotten the most value in terms of like support and insight and advice from the corporate team?
Well, I mean, it's no question. It's from a support perspective from operations. All right. I mean, we're not obviously this is a spaceship, but there are some best practices, and they're certainly, they're out there working with all of us. I mean, we have people that help us, advise us, but at the end of the day, that's one of the things that I think, for people that are on the fence on franchising or that, like sometimes like, well, how am I going to do this? Well, you don't necessarily have to know how to do it. You have to be able to execute. And I think that's one of the things. I mean, when you think about talking to people about franchising, Drew, the big thing is can I run this business? Is it profitable? Can I get financing? And how's it going to change my life? I mean, those are 4 questions. If you're not asking yourself, my other favorite question, that's not to switch topics, is I remember talking to people because as we went through franchising discovery days and that, when we're going through the growth phase, they allowed, obviously, you would call the franchisor, they set you up with a couple of partners to see how the business was. And I remember talking to people in the business like, hey, how do you like it? How is this? And that part was kind of invaluable for people, is to talk to actual, people that are doing it today. Now, granted, they do sometimes cherry pick, but at the end of the day, being truthful in your experience is your experience.
Yeah.
So I think that part is important.
Yeah, for sure. No, validating with existing franchise owners. It's interesting. It's, doing research on a franchise is a lot of work. Obviously, it's a big decision. It should be a lot of work, but most people underestimate how much work it is. And from a time perspective, and surely from the emotional perspective, because it's a roller coaster of emotions. But most people, not folks who I work with, but you've heard the stories of people who buy franchises on their own. They see the widget, they fall in love with it. They buy the franchise, but they don't vet it. They don't do the due diligence. Then they don't talk to franchise owners. And it blows my mind that happens, but it happens out there in franchising. So how did you stumble across this trampoline park / entertainment industry way back when?
Well, it's funny because I read 2 newspapers. I read the Star and Tribune, and I read then it was the Tampa Bay Times or the St. Pete Times. And it was about summertime, July 2011. And the same week, there were 2 articles about this business. Never heard of it, never seen it, had some pictures in the paper online. I was like, this is amazing. I got young kids. It looks just absolutely fun. So I told my wife, like, what do you think of this? She's like, she gave me the standard. I don't care as long as you don't go bankrupt. Check. Makes sense. Put that on.
Just don't lose money, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to guarantee life, get a dog, some taxes. So it was about December, I don't know, 23rd, 22nd. They opened a park called Jump Sky High in Charlotte. And we bought some Groupons. We went there the 26th, right after Christmas. That was, I was like, I felt like a child. I was playing dodgeball, running around. It was the funnest thing you could ever imagine. And it was looking back at that park, pretty much a 1.0 park. So realistically, some of the newer things haven't even come in yet, but it was just a blast. I stood there in awe. I was like, I can't believe this. This is awesome. This is no brainer. My wife looks at me. She goes, no brainer. There's no way we can lose money. I'm like, well, you're probably right. So we started to look for, contacted, obviously Jump Sky High had one in Charlotte. So we felt we needed to go with a different brand. It was, we went with Sky Zone. And spoke with them the 28th. And that's how the journey started. It was that simple. I mean, it was, but I do think going to it and understanding and seeing what it was just, you walked out of there and you walked out there, saw the kids walking in happy. You knew the cash register ringing. And the fact that I had as an adult a fun time, I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's cool. It all came together, just kind of clicked, huh? When you went there, took the family there, and
Well, I think it was a validation point, right? You think you can look at something and go, oh, that's pretty cool. I think it could work. But when you're there doing it and you're like, this is, I mean, I'll tell you, I think this, if you look back in time, there'll be a pendulum change to where kids were playing outside, where people would go to parks, and to where you're going to see a lot more activities being inside. Pandemic being one of them, right? When we were in the pandemic, very few people went outdoors. They did it by themselves. But at the end of the day, when mom wants to go somewhere to have having their kids do some physical activity or entertainment, they're putting them together. Mom sits, gets the internet, reads a book, watches something on Netflix, and the kids run around for an hour, and then they leave. I mean, that's today's playground. I mean, that's you want to be targeted. There's so many activities out there for families that if you can get an hour and a half, bring them over to the trampoline park, run them ragged, and bring them home. I think that's the shift in what I consider today's playground. And I think that's what the businesses are.
Yeah, I have 9-year-old twins, and we were over at a company that I will not mention that was not Sky Zone over the weekend. But yeah, I mean, it's, if you have nothing going on that day on the weekend, it's an amazing hour and a half, 2-hour activity just to let them go have fun by themselves. And, it's one of those experiences that you can't get it anywhere else. Like, it's super unique in terms of just what they offer. So, all right. So you go to the one, it clicks. What happens next?
Oh my! I mean, then it's just so I contact them. We talk about the rights to Charlotte, but they wanted to sell me 2 units. I wanted to again. This is a business that had never been anywhere. I didn't know anything. So I was like, well, I'll build one, and if that works, I'll build another one. Well, we don't like that idea. So throughout the process, I'm looking for buildings in Charlotte. It took about 7 months. We just keep looking, can't find anything that I feel like is going to be a great fit for me. And so I start looking in the various markets. Obviously, I looked at all the markets within driving distance of Charlotte for me. So I went down to Greenville, South Carolina. I found a building on Lawrence Road, an old Best Buy. Looked at that, met my buddy Frank. He was the broker for the building. I'm like, well, he's like, well, it was a build a suit. So Best Buy had abandoned the building and they had like 5 more years on the lease. So I needed to get another 5 years from the owner. And I was going to get a sublease from Best Buy. And then you got to have 10 years for a lot of the loans to go through, especially if you're going to do an SBA loan, because it's going to be a 10-year term. So through the process, I found out that the gentleman that owned the building, he was all over Europe. He was a world traveler. And finally, the attorney that represented the building, he's like, listen, this guy's never going to do anything with you. So, have a nice day. I'm like, okay. So I talked to the broker. I said, do you want to be my broker in Greenville? He says, absolutely. I go, is there any more buildings? He goes, yeah, it's right down the street. Literally 2 blocks away was a building that had been vacant as an old sports authority. And that's where we got our building.
No way.
It was unbelievable. I walk in there, it's literally clean. It's 4 walls. It's square. I'm like, why are we not doing this? And then 6 months later, they finally signed the lease. That was entertaining. And we're not talking a little bit of money. We're talking, 7 figures in rent over 5 years. I mean, it's a lot of money. It's at least in my mind, maybe not to everybody else.
Yeah, no. It's a big time investment. There's no doubt about it.
That's how that all started. I mean, it was an interesting time. Then I moved to Greenville for a year.
Oh, did you really? Okay, yeah. I was going to ask you how you pulled off the remote, living in Charlotte and then operating in Greenville, and the second one's in Raleigh, right?
Yep. I lived in Greenville in an apartment. Millennium Apartments for it seemed like 8-9 months. Then I lived in a hotel for another 3 or 4 months. But at the end of the day, I had to let the kids run the park. I had to let the team run the park. But from my perspective, it was good to know how to do it and them to see me. But at some point, if you're not going to let the people let them do their jobs, it's going to be a difficult time for you long term. Makes sense. I mean, I can't be there every day. I mean,
no, for sure.
Frankly, I don't want to.
Yeah, and I think if you're going into it with that perspective, right, and kind of knowing where you want to get to from an ownership perspective, and understanding that the business has the potential to allow you to get there and still cash flow and make money and all that kind of stuff, it's if you know where you want to go, you can kind of build it towards that. But it takes time, and you got to be present for sure during the beginning.
I think everybody. I mean, the one thing about franchising is you're either, right, wrong, or different. You're either buying yourself or your family a job, or you're going to buy a way for you to own multiple and then hopefully give opportunities to someone else. I mean, I've met plenty of our partners that are going to be single owners or wanted to be single owners. They wanted one thing. They wanted to live in an area. They want to have a great business. And they did. And I still know a few of them now. But, vast majority of the single owners at some level have sold because, well, they got what they wanted out of it. But, for some people, especially in the franchising side of it, I mean, depending on what you want to do, sometimes you are buying yourself, rather than working a corporate job, make your own money and make your own hours at some level.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's the cool part about, franchise. You don't need to know everything. And that's the hard part. I mean, you watch Shark Tank, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I love watching those guys that I've created this widget. I think it's worth $80 billion. And then somebody on the panel is like, well, I don't think it's worth 80 billion. But imagine the scenario where you're somebody that wants to own their own business, but you're not necessarily going to be creating a product, but you can go in and you can buy a business that will do something and generate money. I think that's pretty cool.
Very
and that's
cool.
what franchising, I think, really brings.
And you nailed it when you mentioned execution. If you're an executor and you can execute a plan, think about it as you go through it, but you're willing to do. That is what I've seen. That's one of the components that I've seen the most successful franchise owners have inside them, is just kind of relentless execution. They do the people piece. The second thing is they do the people piece really, really well. Like they're able to build a team of people, create a culture, cast a vision that people can kind of get rallied behind, want to work for them a little bit more than just coming in and punching a clock, getting a paycheck. And then they tend to also understand sales and marketing a little bit too. They're not afraid to put some money in marketing to drive the leads and the customers and stuff like that. But that depends a little bit more on the business. But so did you have any trepidations about living in Charlotte and opening your first park 2.5 hours away in Greenville?
No, then I'll tell you why. This is my favorite type. There was a marketing company that they had hired that are good friends at the franchise company, not necessarily Sky Zone, but the people selling the franchise. And I talked to them and said, what should we do for grand opening? She's like, you just open the doors, people show up. I said, we need to spend a bunch of money. You don't need to spend a lot. I said, what do you mean you don't? Just open the doors. Such a unique business. You open the doors, people will show up. I remember that. So I said to her, just open the doors. Yep. I said, well, I appreciate your insights. I go, if there's anything else you like, just let me know. I left that phone call, that conference call. I was like, this has got to be kidding. You got to be kidding. Right. So I blanket a bunch of marketing with radio. I get a couple of, I didn't know, I just did radio. And the first day we opened, it was nuts. Absolutely crazy. And that part was, and literally you just opened it up and they showed up. That was
wow.
I was just like, okay. And I remember thinking, and it was really probably the first 4 months. If you think of a business as a ship, we'd open, we'd be busy. I'd take a break. I'd go back to my apartment. I'd come back, parking lot's jam packed, and you'd walk in and you could almost feel like, everyone's trying their hardest, but we're busy from the get-go. So that ship is just kind of sailing itself. We're not necessarily, we're reacting to things and not necessarily proactive. But after about 4 months, 3-4 months, the same thing. We're busy as all get out, and we come back, and you'd walk in, and you could see us as a concert. You could see that the team had figured it out. They'd captained it. The sense of the operations was smooth. People knew what to expect. But I remember those first couple of months when we were just jamming, and I was like, what bad could happen? What could go wrong? I mean, all sorts of different, you could definitely feel the sense of calm as people stayed with us, got more experience and the business level. But that was, I remember one of my brothers asked me after the first 6 months, did you make any money? That's what he said. You make any money? I said, really? You're just coming right at me with the money. I said, we made money the first month we were open. We turned a profit every month. And again, you look at a restaurant, first 12 months, it's almost impossible to make any money. You're probably going to go out of business in a restaurant, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Within 2 years and 3 years, you're almost out. So we hit every business milestone in these things and blew them out of the water. Like, I was like, okay. My one buddy's like, he called me up. There's probably 2 years in. He's like, you still doing this thing? I said, we're still doing it. And he's like, you like it? I said, yeah. And he said he should have gotten that business. I just laughed. But it's definitely an interesting, after you get open, especially, we obviously had plenty of support from the franchisor there, but man, watching your team kind of grow and get that experience, and all of a sudden that ship, all of a sudden you see that the captain at the wheel, you're driving that ship in the direction. Pretty cool. And now looking back, I think we're going to finish our 10th year. We'll finish 9 full years, start our 10th year in 7 days, 8 days, the 6th of October.
Yeah, it's probably one of those feelings, like, kind of hard to articulate it to somebody else in terms of just what it feels like to you personally. And it's kind of one of those feelings you can only kind of get working for yourself, I think, too, right? Like, hard to get that kind of stuff when you're building somebody else's business and stuff like that. When it's your business and you see your team come together, kind of everything clicks, they're running the business, and it also helps that you're making some money too. It's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool feeling.
Well, I think for anybody that thinks about franchising, I think, or not necessarily even thinks about franchise, but just wants to work for themselves and wants to make their own money. I mean, there's a part that is really satisfying, that you're beating the odds. I mean, even though the indoor trampoline wasn't my concept, wasn't my idea, but we bought some, and seeing them, you still got to operate them. I mean, there's good operators. I mean, I love how you state that, people that can operate or execute are going to help out. I mean, I think everybody should be able to do it. I mean, I believe anybody can do whatever they want as long as they want to do it. I mean, passion and persistence to me are the two things. You've heard me say that before, and I'll probably say it to anybody. I mean, people ask, what makes you successful? Passion and persistence. If you're passionate about something, you're interested, you're going to try to grind it. And if you have persistence, you're going to persevere through the tough times. I mean, you're going to find a building. You're going to overcome that obstacle. But if you don't have those two things about something, then you're probably, it's not going to go as well as it could.
Yeah, no, well said, for sure.
I didn't mean to be, too melancholy on that one.
No. It's. I mean, I think what you're saying, and you're dropping a lot of nuggets on people that are listening in terms of just like what it's like. It's not all rainbows and unicorns, right? But there's gonna be stuff that the franchise company didn't tell you about. There's gonna be stuff that you're like, what's that?
It's not all puppy dogs and ice cream.
Puppy dogs and ice cream. Yeah. There's going to be a lot of stuff you got to figure out, and things that you didn't think about and can't plan for, and just fight through them if you want to get to, and you figure it out. And you got the help. I mean, you got the franchise company there to call and kind of bounce some ideas off of as well. And
there's one stuff. Yeah. I mean, I think that's one thing, the support side of everything is a vastly, I can't speak for all franchisors, but I can tell you, from my perspective, we always have a great relationship. They always have, if you get a question, call them up. I mean, I've talked to the guys. I mean, most of the people that are working in the franchise business either have worked in it a long time or have specific knowledge in that specific industry that you're in. So from a Skyzone perspective, because we're one of the larger companies, we get a lot of people from multi-unit experience. So you're just talking to them. They could have been Panera Breads, they could have been Dunkin' Donuts, and listening to those guys and understanding, okay, how do you stay profitable? How's your marketing? How's your cost? Are you even looking at that stuff? I mean, I remember coming from a computer background. My big thing was, I don't have a ton of inventories, but I want to make sure that we're counting inventories. We're making the small things, making sure we understand where our money is, how much money we have in the building from a dead cost perspective, and that. And I remember one of the guys from Dunkin' was like, well, okay. And we go through kind of a weekly weekend review, just kind of go back and forth. And that was one thing. He's like, well, this is really good stuff because you get to see how that your expenses, your revenues, kind of all that stuff. So I think from that part, hopefully everybody realizes if you don't have all the answers, somebody's going to be there to help you. For
sure. So what are some of the key metrics that you look at with your businesses right now?
100%. I mean, for me, my big thing is labor. Our labor costs, obviously everyone knows, we're in a tough environment to hire people. Our jobs are usually entry level, younger folks. So we're trying to always hire more people. I look at life as a coaching tree. If you can think of a football analogy, I want kids to come in, work for a few years, and go off and do what they want to do. Become great people. And hopefully, we're a part of their life. Hopefully, we're a part of their experience, and that's the part. So labor is my biggest thing to look at. Then obviously, just making sure our costs are in line. We've got a number of years of data. So just looking at those trends and making sure that they don't see a bunch of hockey sticks or something that goes up. You're like, well, I wonder why that is. I'm like, oh, that seems bad. Well, hey guys, what happened? So it's just a way of making sure when you're running your own business, having your KPIs or your key metrics and identifying those and then managing them. Pretty simple stuff. I mean, seems simple to me, but I'm set up a way to do it that you can understand. And once you do that, just management. And then just remember, anytime you set up a metric or a way to control something, that may change over time. And just take a honest look back and say, should I change this? I mean, I've had this discussion with my managers. Hey, we're doing this. Do you guys want to continue to do this? Because it doesn't seem like it's providing any value. And they'll say, yes, it is providing value, or no. And we'll make changes. Simple stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of get the feedback from the front lines.
Yeah.
In addition to what you're seeing on the paper.
Absolutely.
in the stuff. So you have a workforce that is more generally described as probably part-time. Somebody's not going to necessarily, have a career path long-term working for Sky Zone, maybe unless they were on a management path. But it sounds like you've embraced that. Like you're like, hey, this is who is going to be working at our parks. This is who our team's going to be. Let's embrace it. Let's get some good people in, help them learn a thing or two, help them have some fun, and then ultimately help them get to where they want to get to and play a small part in that journey for these folks. Is that kind of how you set up the hiring, or what do you do? What do you do to get the people that you want to come work at your parks?
Pretty crazy, but to say, I mean, most of the people that come in just come in, and we'll have an Indeed ad. We'll put a Facebook post up. For the most part, though, a lot of our workers have come to the parks. In fact, one of the parks we have a third generation person working there.
Really?
We had a brother, we had a sister, and now we have the other sister. I was like, wow, look at the name. I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure I know who that is. We have another set of three gals that have all worked for, and they're still working for us now. I mean, to me, what I tell the staff, would I like everyone to work for me forever? Absolutely. But that's unrealistic. What your job and my job is to give them the best information, get them the best skill set possible, so that when they go out and look for their next job, that you've given them the ability to say, I'm a leader. From a management perspective, I'm a good leader. I understand business. Obviously, I'm punctual, on time, all the other pieces. And then whatever they want to learn, whatever I can give them. I mean, they have my phone number. Call me 24/7. From a part-time person, realistically, we get a lot of folks that were in fast food and they just like it. And I'm going to be honest with you, if I had a choice between working at a trampoline park or fast food, I'm going to work at a trampoline park. I mean, it's just that much funner. But that's what we get. And from our perspective, obviously, still difficult given the hiring. The challenges labor-wise. Everyone is aware of that in the country today. But we managed to get through the pandemic, and we sometimes it's a little light on staff, and sometimes it's not. But the reality is, kids want to come and work, and we give them an environment, hopefully, that they like. And it's indoors. You don't smell like a French fry, and hopefully they have some fun.
Nice. That's awesome. So when did you decide to open up your second location in Raleigh?
Well, I mean, I always wanted to get in another location. I just, in my mind, having one in South Carolina, living in North Carolina, I always felt like a spoken wheel model. Right. I didn't think about having them in Texas or theirs. It was really just the area. And given the size of the investment to put them in, they sold quickly. And so I was trying to buy different ones over the last few years, and we were able to buy one in Raleigh, North Carolina. It was a nice park, and we took that one. That one unfortunately did close. And at that point, that was the only Sky Zone that closed and reopened. So it closed in November, and we reopened it in March of 2018. And so that one's been going for, arguably since 2014. So we're on that one's 9 years too, but we bought it in 18 from a bank. So it's unfortunately for that, but that one
was a Sky Zone. It was a Sky Zone.
Yeah.
Really? So you took over just a business that had been not run properly. And
I didn't want to. I remember the day it closed, they called me up, and I called the owner. I'm like, hey, and he didn't call me back. And then, unfortunately, the bank called me the following day and asked me if I was still interested. I said, absolutely. And we made it happen. But it was challenging. I remember being in the building in January of 18 when we closed. It had been closed since November. And I was kind of going through it, dusted it off, getting ready to try to figure out what do we need to do to open it. And there was people knocking on the door. I opened, like, hey, are you guys not open? Unfortunately, this one's closed, but we open shortly. Do you know when? I said, I don't know when, but stay tuned. Stay tuned to the website. And that happened throughout the day, throughout the first. I was there 6 weeks. That's just crazy to me. Now, it took a whole year for the community to realize we had reopened, but after that, it's been a fun business.
So, how did you get comfortable taking over a location that closed? How did you go about figuring that thing out?
What do you mean?
Well, like, I mean, what gave you the confidence that you could turn it around?
Well, obviously, being part of the network, I saw some of their numbers and they were good. I knew that I knew the business was good. I'm not, not everyone's the same operator. So I felt, pretty strongly, and I liked the business for many years. In fact, I made offers for it prior to that.
Okay. All right. So you were pretty familiar with it.
They were, I mean, again, to this day, I still, there's still some questions about, the why, but I'm not going to question the why. I'm just going to question the how. We got it open. People came back. And when they found out that we were reopened, they were like, thank God you reopened. We didn't realize it. Sorry. They went to a competitor. I'm like, oh, don't be sorry. Welcome back. So it's really interesting. And I'm not going to say it's, we took all the concepts that we had, our operating policies, which were all, realistically, in the spirit of everything that we're doing with franchisor, and we just, popped it in and validated that the concept worked. So since then, I've been trying to buy additional ones. I think that's the best path to more units, because it is a pretty significant investment, and obviously construction costs have gotten pretty high.
Yeah. Yeah. And leases, it's a different ball game on the leases these days, right? Lease terms from back when you were
I told you, I don't think that the laws of capitalism apply to any commercial real estate. So I mean, during the pandemic, I was fortunate enough to work with all my landlords, and having that honest dialogue of how are you guys going to do? How does this mean in that? And so just realizing that, some of the spaces, from a retail perspective, I mean, that's a tough market right now. Light industrial, not as tough. So everyone believes their stuff is worth a lot of money, and it's worth what somebody's willing to pay for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the challenge, right? So you've got markets now. What we're seeing now in this, the biggest trend was just down in Nashville for a national convention. And one of the things is consolidation, existing parks that may or may not be, super profitable being sold and rebranded to different ones because they have the space or the building. Real estate's one of the hardest parts in this business to get into.
Yeah.
Because you need a huge amount of space. I mean, if I want to put a 1,200 square foot yogurt stand, I can pretty much, I can find a spot in pretty much any strip. I want to do a dry cleaner or any kind of service business, it's there.
Yeah. There's only a limited number of potential spots for these parks.
And right now with today's market, I mean, there's multiple vendors that are, if there's a building that's 25,000 square foot or more, I would assume the landlord. I remember, I just had this discussion last week, 2012, looking for a building in trampoline park. What is that? Fast forward to 22. If you're talking to somebody that has a building, they've been contacted by at least 2 or 3 men. They know exactly, trampoline park, great. It's just so much a different market, but you're right. Real estate's tough and it's expensive. And even though we may hit some financial headwinds, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a break anywhere else.
I know when I talk to people about the trampoline park business, and these are, non-business owners, these are folks that are thinking about becoming business owners. And a lot of times people's heads immediately go to the downside of any business, right? Oh, that won't work because of this, or, oh my gosh, how the heck do you deal with insurance? Like, I would imagine insurance is a thing in your business, but I'm making an assumption. So what's the insurance like at a trampoline park?
It's interesting. So one of the big things that our franchisor does is provides the insurance coverage. So they go out and shop it, and it's a challenging policy, no question. But I want to hit on something, not necessarily insurance, but the thing that you just said about, always thinking about the downside. The mentality of someone who wants to get in franchising or work for themselves or make their own money. I mean, my dad said it best: expect the best, plan for the worst. The reality is there's going to be 2 sides to the coin. But if you don't know the downside, I've had this discussion with many people. I asked them, I said, how much money do you need to make on this business? Or my first question is, how much money do you need to make to live? And they inevitably, they all, they tighten up. They don't want to tell me. I said, so let's just make some numbers up. I said, if your family is $500,000 to live and you're buying a business that makes $200,000, I said, it's probably not the right business for you. You're going to need to buy 3 of them. And sometimes you can hear the wheels spinning in their mind. Oh, I didn't think about that. I really think that's one of the things that's, when you talk about downside, my whole downside to somebody is how much money do you need to make? If this is your only source of income and this doesn't go well, what's going to mean to you, your family, and your financial situation? And just make sure you understand it. Recognize the risk, but expect the best, plan for the worst. And most people, I remember having a discussion with my accountant and my attorney. They said, well, because I used 401k financing. And they said, we don't like it. I said, why don't you like it? So, there's just, your retirement's for your retirement. I said, okay, well, I'm not dead yet. And they said, but if the only way you can do it is to do that, then they're good. And I think, again, I recognized there was a downside. I could lose all my money. How's my retirement? Well, I'm young. I'm going to keep working. So I think recognizing the downside, but understanding that there is upside. So expect the best, plan for the worst. And I think that's something that's really interesting that you brought up is why will something work? Great. Take those assumptions, put it in your business plan, say why doesn't it work? But then really look at the pros. There has to be some level of pro. Because if there's no pro, probably not the right business for you.
Well said.
Sorry.
Well said. No, and you can, the benefit is too, you make these assumptions, right? And it's good to make assumptions, but just know that they're assumptions, right? The good ones and the downside ones. And you can validate or invalidate these assumptions by going through the research for the most part, by talking to franchise owners, hearing what the franchise company has to say, validating a lot of what they have to say too, with these existing franchise owners. And there's a little bit of an art, right, to having those conversations to get people to really open up to you and comfortable sharing a lot of personal information, personal insight. But yeah, it's good to make assumptions. Just know that they're assumptions and they need to be validated or invalidated. One of the ways.
Well, I remember people asked me, they were like, because obviously we were a pretty unique business. People would come into the and they're like, oh, are you the owner? I'm like, well, yes, and so they're like, oh, we're going to open one here. We're going to do this. I'm like, great. But it's funny. People would ask me, how did you figure it out? I said, well, you got to do a business plan. Like, what? Business plan? Well, how do you know what you're going to do? I go, we guess. They're like, what? You guess? I said, yeah, half the world's about guessing. It's just about guessing. Maybe my guesses are good. Maybe our guesses are bad. I go, be conservative. But something that you talked about right there, and most people struggle with is estimating, guessing. It may not be right. But if you don't put anything down, I guarantee you're going to struggle. But if you have a general idea of what your revenues are going to be, what your expenses are going to be, just guess. The hardest part for some people is, well, how did you know if it was right? Guess I didn't. No one knows. If you could figure out what the future is, we're going to roll into Vegas and bet some sports.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But nobody can see the future. But that's the one thing I think from a entrepreneur or a business owner is understanding that you have to guess, and hopefully you make more rights than wrongs, but realize you're going to learn more from. I learned a ton from making mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, and they make them every day. They may seem like not a mistake, but it is. But I can think back to a couple of things, and I'm just not going to share them with you because they were significant amounts of money. And I really, thinking back, you're like, why did I do that? I thought I was doing the right thing, and I was not. And then I fixed it, and I'm like, oh, I like this a lot better. So some of the times I think people just need to realize that the assumptions or guesses and their estimates, they may not be right or wrong, but it gives you a point in time or a dollar amount or a number that they can then control or look at and say, oh, I got to do something different. And I think that's half the battle. I think that's something that your listeners might want to, as they're evaluating different franchises or different business opportunities or different things, recognize that you're not going to be perfect, but as long as you're directionally correct, think good things will happen.
Yeah, it's like the 20, what is it, Pareto's principle? Kind of have an understanding of the 20% of the business that drives 80% of the results, and then kind of worrying about that last 20%, but really just understanding what the key pieces of the business that make it go, and then understanding, okay, how do you play? How do you feel about doing what it takes to make this business successful with that, with that chunk that drives most of the results?
Wow. That is a great, that probably is, it's kind of eerie because I had that same statement. We got to a point after about year 4, we had seen pretty much everything. There wasn't something that we weren't going to see. It's not we're not a very dynamic. We do birthday parties. We have this playtime, but I use the 80-20 principle all the time. And so we're looking at scenarios. We were like, customer complaints, customer service. We look at them and we classify. I'm like, hey, is this recurring? Is this training? Is this just a one-off? And how do you want to handle it? I said, well, I don't want to do anything. I go, that's a 5%, 4% through that happens once every 10 years. I said, so don't worry about it. We'll note it. But 80/20 is a really good rule to look at. If you can figure out how 80% of the time your business runs really smooth and the other 20, then work on the 20%, because you're gonna be miles ahead of everybody else. But recognize if you're spending more time on the 20% problems, not the 80, you're looking at the wrong numbers. I mean, people will tell you, if you don't save the pennies, you lose the dollars. I sometimes say, again, if you're at the point where you're drowning if you're sucking through a funnel, at some point you'll get the business, and then it'll be about managing it and really looking at those specific circumstances. So 80/20, and I think that's a really good thing to think about for people. And it's something that when you said that, I just reminded me of having discussion with my managers, like, well, how should we handle this one? Well, let's not, because it's just not that important to the bottom line revenue.
Yeah. Yeah. And it goes to what you were saying earlier when we were talking offline about the cash flow, like how you look at the business from a financial perspective in terms of, debt and cash flow, right? Like using debt to build a business that cash flows. And,
I mean, yeah, it was interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because that was a lesson that, still resonates to me today. I mean, I had a couple of guys that I wanted to go into business with, still do. I think they're great guys, but they couldn't. One of the things I will tell people is just be prepared to be in debt, and not for a few bucks. And so I remember signing my first first loan, big loan, and I was like, look at this, and one of my buddies, he goes, I can't believe somebody would lend you that kind of money. I said, can't believe it either. But be prepared to be in debt, and that's what I've learned. And I'm not going to say that I certainly, there's plenty of internet wizards out there that will tell you to take 100,000, go borrow 10 million, buy 17 buildings, and you're going to be a billionaire. But I will say there's a level of debt that you have to be comfortable with if you're going to be an entrepreneur. It's just going to happen. It's kind of like kids. You wake up and all of a sudden you got 2 kids. You're like, where do these kids come from? Hey, I got to pay 18. It's just like that. Being out there working for yourself, there's a level of debt. But the big thing that people are like, well, I got to pay that off. Well, I don't think you do. What you have to have is the ability to pay off and get cash flow, and that's the hardest part, right? If you could run a business for 15 years and have $10 million borrowed on it, but at the end of the day, you cash flow that business crazy and you pay yourself a salary, is that a problem? You have the ability to pay it off at the end, or even if you don't pay it off, then sell the business to somebody else.
Right.
Pay that debt off, and you've walked away with all the money during the time you're operating. I think that's the one principle that I didn't get when I first started out. It's like, oh, I want to get this paid off, and then my life's going to be better. Well, it's not. If you make money, you need expenses, and then interest expense is not a bad one to have.
Right.
But recognizing that cash flow is what the banks are going to look at. So if you're looking to go into business for yourself, or buy a second one, or buy anything else, or diversify the cash flow is king. They're going to say, well, can you service the debt? Right. And if you've got, let's just make some numbers. You want to borrow $5 million and your loan payments, $60,000, but your cash flow is $400,000 a month or $200,000 a month. You're 2x of that. You're going to be fine.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hard part mentality of people. Just understand that you're going to be in debt and get comfortable, buckle up.
Yeah. And it's leveraging debt to create cash flow in a very calculated way.
That's sexy right there. That's a great way of putting it.
I think you said that. I think I borrowed that from you.
I don't think I did. I liked it.
But you mentioned that it wasn't like the banks were lining up to give you the money to build your first park, right? Like you had to fight to go find the right bank to partner with. That there
was a couple. It didn't take long. It only took about. I talked to the big banks. That was. My advice to anyone is, there's nothing wrong with our friends at bigger banks, but that was. I have a story, but I'm not going to say it. But at the end of the day, at that point in my mentality of financing, I thought the big banks were better than small. And I've since that is small banks are way better. They're easier to work with. They're easier to get financing. They have smaller loan committees. They're willing to work with you because they've got. In banking right now, if you're not lending money, you're not making money, and that's the part I think. For some people that whether you're worried about financing, worried about going out this and that. I mean, the money is one of the big aspects. People are like, I'd be in business, but I can't get the money. Well, I think you can. And I think you want to go to, they're like, why should I go to a big bank? I'm like, no, go find a small bank, go work with them and they'll work with you. Those guys are hungry. They want to get it. And that's, mean, I'm sure how do you feel about small banks versus big banks? They're easier to work with, aren't they?
Yeah, I had the conversation yesterday with somebody. They're going to probably have to go, fight to find the right bank to give them the money for a business. And, the first question was, who do you bank with? And he said, Wells Fargo. I said, don't call them. Oh, sorry for anybody listening to Wells, Wells Cargo, whatever, bank that runs. Yeah, I mean, the big ones, right? It's like, they just don't, they don't play in that space. They're just not geared that way. And so the smaller regional community banks, there's definitely the play to go. So agree 100% with what you just shared.
Yeah, but I think it's just it's fascinating. But that financing part of it to me is interesting. And just, again, as a person that's going to work for themselves or buy business, work in that, do any of this, just buckle up for some debt.
Yep.
Don't worry about it, because if you've got the cash flow, it won't make a bit of difference. And my name is not Bant Cardone. Makes me laugh right there.
I love it. All right. So what's next?
I don't know.
In your journey?
Working on a ton of different things. Always trying to work on different things. I've worked with a couple guys. I think they're going to come around at some point on a business. Working with a couple other guys right now that want to do something similar in the space, and we're gonna explore that for a while. I mean, it's batten down the hatches at some point here in the U.S. I don't, depends on how you feel. I mean, 3 months ago, one would argue we were already in a recession, and then they tell me the recession's historic the last 18 months. If we were in a recession 4 months ago, then we're halfway through it.
Right.
Doesn't feel like it. So I think it's going to be an interesting ride. And obviously, we've seen some challenges in interest rates. I mean, I just had a good conversation with a banker that I used to work with, and just kind of asking him where the dollars and cents were from an SBA perspective. Wow, it's I'll throw it out there. My first loan was at like 6.5. They're selling money at 9% right now. That's a big difference.
Yeah.
But again, if you're going to do it, remember, as long as you're making money and you're cash flowing, the interest is tax deductible. I mean, that part in people, again, that's too much money. Well, not really. I mean, historically, back in the day when I grew up, I don't know, but under 7% loan back in the day was great. I mean, people have gotten so used to having almost, my interest rate's like 0.5%. I've refied 3 times. My house is going to be paid off in 2 days.
Yeah.
Great. But right now, some people don't have that same kind of luxury. And I just talked to a person 2 days ago about that. And I asked them what kind of interest rates are at. 9%. That's a lot of money. The cost of lending is changing, but I still think, again, in today's economy, I think you can still get started. This is not a bad time. I don't think there's better times, but I think we're going to come through this. I mean, what are your thoughts? Q1, Q2 could be rather interesting.
Yeah. I mean, when I bought my first house, August of 2008, which was about a month before the world stopped, I was at 6.5%. I was like, boom, let's go. I'm ready. You didn't know anything different, right? It was what it was. I think we've been spoiled for a very long time on the interest rate thing, for sure.
I agree.
But the pendulum swings back. It always swings both ways. So who knows how hard it's going to keep swinging in the one way we're headed, but it'll come back in a different way. And who knows what that's going to be. But I think it's something to look at. But like you said, having an interest payment is not a bad thing with the EBITDA, and as it relates to cash flow and using having some pre-tax expenses in your business and all that good stuff. But yeah, I look at the end of the day, who knows? I believe in the entrepreneurial spirit. I believe we'll figure it out. We'll get through this thing. And, there's always opportunity in these things too. It's just,
I agree. My journey has been, I feel pretty lucky. I'm not gonna lie to you. Sometimes just taking the jump, the leap, I had a friend of mine that just started his personal training business. Super proud of him. And it's making good money. But half the battle is just doing it, getting out there and trying. Is everything going to be successful? I don't know. Yes or no, maybe. I don't know. But again, if it's something you're interested in, you're probably going to spend more time. In my perspective, I put a lot of chips in, and there's no other way for us to go but be successful. And it worked out. There's no question. I got a little lucky, but you know what? It's better be lucky than good.
Well, and you nailed it with passion and persistence, right? Like if you truly have that inside of you, you're going to figure it out. And who knows what the journey is going to look like, because nobody knows what their journey looks like. And that's kind of life. But if you're willing to figure things out that come across your business and your life, you'll get through it. It'll be okay. But you got to be willing to work. You got to be willing to do it and put the work in to push through it. So yeah. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you, Alan.
I appreciate
coming on.
You inviting me to chat with you.
Yeah, no, I look forward to more conversations on the golf course and taking more of your money on the golf course. I'm just kidding. So if anybody wants to get in touch with you, how can people get in touch with you and sign up to come play at your parks?
Just head to our website, skyzone.com/Greenville, skyzone.com/Raleigh. Send me a note. Send me a note. We got email accounts right on the website. Just to send me a note. Happy to help anybody. Appreciate your time today, and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Yeah, man. You too.
All right. See you, Drew.
Yeah. That's a wrap. Hope you found a nugget or two in there that can help you on your franchise journey. And if you ever want to talk franchising, reach out to me anytime.